What is going on, everyone? This is Sunrise Sports and MMA. And on this video, I want to talk a little bit about that 7-year partnership between UFC and ESPN. How did it affect both the UFC and ESPN? And let's talk a little bit about this, right? Let's talk about setting the stage, right? Pre-ESPN, we're talking before 2018, and we already know that the UFC was a proven global powerhouse in MMA, but it feels like they were still searching for mainstream legitimacy, right? I mean, if we look at the prior deals, I know we've talked about this on other videos. They had the Spike TV deal that ran from 2005 to 2011. The Fox Sports deal that ran from 2012 to 2018. So it looks like the UFC tends to switch homes every 7 years or so. I like to think it's very healthy, right? It means you're with someone for a long period of time, but you're always looking to improve, right? So, I mean, no big deal there. The Fox deal helped the mainstream, right? Helped make it mainstream. But the main issue was that the ratings, from all accounts, plateaued, right? There just was nowhere else to go from there. The UFC wanted guaranteed money, but not the ad-based risk. And it seems like at the time, Fox Sports was also trying to exit from combat sports. If we remember correctly, Fox Sports did a whole, change up and moved more towards the daytime talk shows with the Skip Baylesses and the Shannon Sharps. So they were kind of pivoting what they wanted their content to be, right? So that set the stage, right, for one of the biggest media deals in combat sports history at the time. So the ESPN deal, right? The terms, as we know, it was announced in May of 2018. The length actually was 5 years, so there was a bit of a gap or bridge there between the Fox deal and the beginning of the ESPN deal. Again, the valuation was $1.5 billion with an average of $300 million per year, which would include the exclusive ESPN Plus fight nights. We all know about that dreaded, what do you call that? The dreaded commercial with the what looked like the Apex building, right, with different notable sports figures. And this included also select pay-per-views were simulcasted via ESPN Plus. So pretty much it was not a full transition to the pay-per-view model dominated by, I guess, the ESPN media rights. Now, for the UFC, this was guaranteed revenue, right? Win or lose, sell or not, they were making money. It made sense. It wasn't risky compared to the Fox deal. So then came ESPN Plus. The UFC became the tenant, right, the anchor for ESPN Plus in its early days. They needed to drive exclusive content, which thus would drive the subscriptions. So the UFC made sense, right? Live sports year-round, and obviously that even referred to the COVID years or months, which we'll get more into later on. But what that meant for ESPN, approximately, based on public reporting, is in 2018 they had 1 million subscribers. That jumped to around 8 million subscribers in 2020. So again, an increase of 700% right there. And then by 2023, they were at 25 million plus subscribers. And I think the ESPN plan at the time was anywhere from $7.99 to about $12.99 and a little bit more than that if you didn't want commercials and all that other additional content based on the model. So again, good revenue stream for ESPN on the subscriber model, and I'm sure on the ad model as well. So you could say the UFC didn't just benefit from ESPN, but it helped build ESPN Plus, right? And then from there, we go to the pay per view model, right? And the revenue control. Before ESPN, the pay per views were sold through the cable providers, right? Your Xfinities, AT&T, Dish, DirecTV, etc. And the UFC was splitting the revenue with the distributors, right? So it wasn't like they were making the full amount. And I'm inclined to believe that a lot of that, we're talking maybe 50% or half, was going to those distributors, right? Then during the ESPN era, ESPN Plus became the exclusive digital pay-per-view platform, right? So the UFC gained more control over the distribution, right? Just one channel or one source rather. They were able to track their client analytics or the customer analytics a lot better, and it reduced the reliance on cable. My feedback and things I've seen in Facebook and even myself, when I've bought any UFC, there were issues with the streaming service early on, especially during some of those, peak UFC events. One notable, 300, right? There was a lot of people trying to buy last minute, and so it was very difficult. And the question is, was their platform able to sustain the amount of inquiries of people trying to buy the product, which I think we know the answer to that. So there was a lot of issues there. But for the UFC, it made a lot of sense financially. They were not concerned whether or not pay-per-views dipped or decreased, at least when it came to their balance sheet. ESPN was paying a fixed amount, and from the UFC side, they were getting their money, right? Now, the fighter pay and the revenue, right, split, that's been somewhat of a controversy. We know the UFC revenue hovers around 1.3 billion, at least from reports dating back to 2022 to 2023. Back in 2018, it was about half of that, 700 million to 800 million, a little bit more than half of that, right? But ESPN made UFC one of the most profitable sports properties, per employee. And again, that's the ESPN deal with UFC. The fighter pay, again, we've talked about this in a few other videos. It's estimated that the fighters took 15 to 20% of that revenue. If you compare it to major leagues, your NFLs, your NBAs, they have more of a 48 to 50% share under their collective bargaining agreements. Again, I don't like making the comparison because we're talking about two entities that are at least, 50, 60, 70 years old compared to the UFC, which, if we really want to get down to it, its inception was in the early 2000s, late 90s, right? So still there's a lot more for the UFC to mature into its own, what their own narrative will be moving forward. But from a business standpoint, the ESPN deal was a massive success, right? From a fighter pay perspective, again, one of the most controversial topics, the debate has only increased. Now, especially now, moving into the Paramount Plus deal, right, or era. So that's pretty much where we're at. We know where we're heading in 2030. We'll see what happens there. That's when the next renewal is up for the UFC. By then, it'll be a more mature organization. I could definitely see some more things happening. We could see ESPN come back to the table in 2030. We could see Paramount double down. Right now, the UFC has not renewed with any of their partners so far, unless you want to count the Spike TV deal that Spike TV, for those that don't know, eventually became what is known as Paramount Plus. So, again, if you want to take that as that they do, then great. If not, I look at it more so 3 different entities, 3 different stages that the UFC was in. And again, I'll try to talk more about the Paramount deal as more of the information starts to come out. Fighter pay. Are we going to see some of these cards on CBS? What's going to happen with the pay-per-view model? Are we sure that it's actually dead? Well, I'll have more for you guys to come. This is Sunrise Sports and MMA signing off. Bye.